If you want to hear my thoughts on more recent happenings in the NFL, then be sure to check out my all-new channel, JG9 News, where I talk about everything happening in the NFL right now in a completely relaxed, unscripted format. New videos drop daily. And now, on with our feature presentation. January 15, 2024. It's wildcard weekend, and we've got a battle on our hands in the AFC up in Orchard Park between the Buffalo Bills and the Pittsburgh Steelers. By the end of this game, the result in terms of who would win the contest was not a shock to anyone. The Bills entered the game as a superior team, having won 5 straight to end the regular season, and having an offense that was firing on all cylinders, while the Steelers entered this game as one of the worst playoff teams in recent memory, without their star pass rusher in TJ Watt, with a negative point differential, with an offense that ranked 28th in football and was being led by Mason Rudolph of all people under center, and needing a fair amount of help just to get into the playoffs in the first place. Buffalo was a heavy favorite to win the game, and a double-digit favorite won at home in convincing fashion, taking it by a final score of 31-17. Buffalo jumped out to an early 21-0 lead in the first half. Josh Allen was unstoppable, running for a touchdown and throwing for 3, while the Steelers got nothing going offensively, as Mason Rudolph did nothing throughout the entire contest but check passes down. The win sent Buffalo to the divisional round for the 4th straight season, and gave the Steelers their 7th straight season without a playoff win. But the crazy part about this game wasn't how the game was played, but rather when the game was played. You see, originally, this game was supposed to be held on Sunday, January 14th at 1 o'clock. The original game plan was a triple header on Sunday, as had been the case for the last 4 seasons since the NFL expanded the postseason to 7 teams per conference, where you have the day conclude with a Sunday night game, have a game at 4:30 Eastern in the middle of it all, and have a game at 1 o'clock Eastern to lead off the day. People are accustomed to football at 1 o'clock Eastern. For the past 18 weeks, people have gathered around their television sets or their local bar to watch football at that time slot, with at least 5 games taking place in that window every single week. So it makes sense as to why a wildcard round game would be at that time slot. However, a wrench was thrown into the plan when a massive snowstorm hit Buffalo. Now, snow in Buffalo isn't exactly uncommon. The area seems to get hit with something every year. It's part of living in upstate New York. But this storm was especially bad. It left 500,000 people without power. It made the roads a mess. It led to a travel ban being enforced, and led to the death of 3 people. The NFL had a decision to make. We can play the game as scheduled at 1 o'clock, but if we do that, it would be complete chaos. People would be endangering their lives to get to this game. A lot of people are snowed in and are unable to go anywhere. We'd be playing the game in spite of a travel ban. We'd be risking people's lives and putting them in danger because the roads are icy and are not safe to drive on. You'd have no visibility in your car whatsoever. And on top of that, however dangerous the roads are now, imagine 70,000 cars on the road driving in these conditions after the car was sitting in an open parking lot for more than 5 hours, meaning that cars would be snowed in and buried and might not be able to get out, meaning that people would be stalled and trapped with nowhere to go. And now, imagine the fact that people drink at games. So you always run the risk and the possibility that people will, unfortunately, drive home from the game drunk and impaired. And now, they'll have to do it on icy roads where they cannot see a thing. If the NFL played this game at its original time slot, simply put, people would have died. This was not a matter of it being too cold or anything along those lines. This was a matter of it not being safe to travel and have a mass gathering in these conditions. So the NFL decided to do something that they had never done before. They moved the playoff game by an entire day, shifting it from Sunday, January 14th to Monday, January 15th. There had been playoff games played on a Monday before. It hadn't happened in over 3.5 decades, when the NFL used to play playoff games on Monday, December 26th, if Christmas fell on Sunday, December 25th, after the backlash the league received when they previously played on Christmas in 1971, which you can learn more about by clicking the card in the upper right corner. But still, to play a playoff game on a Monday afternoon? I know it's safer for everyone, and it means that fans will actually be able to attend the game without putting themselves or anyone else in danger. And it means we won't be wasting emergency services on a football game. But how many people are seriously going to watch a playoff game on a Monday afternoon? Yes, it's a federal holiday, with it being Martin Luther King Day, so government officials and most schools have off. But a lot of people still have to work on this day. You're moving a game from the 1 o'clock window, which everyone associates football with, to a Monday afternoon during a workday for some people. This game is going to be a ratings disaster. Instead, it turned out to be anything but. Because to the shock of everyone, the Bills-Steelers playoff game drew astronomical ratings that I don't think anyone saw coming. When the Nielsen ratings came in for the game, they revealed that, on average, 31 million people watched, with 36.7 million people tuning into the game at its peak. It was the most watched AMC wildcard game since the postseason expanded. The game, simply put, was a ratings smash, and did better than any CBS wildcard game at 1 o'clock had done in quite some time, and was a big reason why the NFL drew its highest average television audience for wildcard weekend since the 2015 playoffs. The lesson here is that weather necessitates change. And sometimes, when the weather plays a part and forces you to adjust and think on your feet, it results in changes that you might always stick with, and changes that actually work out in your favor. The next time the NFL has a wildcard weekend coincide with Martin Luther King Day, and the next time the NFL has a situation where wildcard weekend is next to the third Monday in January, we could see some changes to the schedule as a result, because the weather forced a completely accidental shift that ended up working out very well in the league's favor. Or, how about this example? January 15th, 1978. We're down in New Orleans for Super Bowl 12 between the Dallas Cowboys and the Denver Broncos, with the winner claiming football's championship, which, if it's the Cowboys, is their second title in franchise history, and if it's the Broncos, is their first title ever. The original plan for the pregame show was simple. Go on the air a few minutes beforehand, talk about the matchup, maybe do a feature or two on players playing the game, make some predictions, and then go to the game with little fanfare. It was very much going to be a very traditional pregame show, and the reason for that was because, number one, there didn't seem to be much interest in a super long pregame show. I mean, what can you possibly talk about for that long? Are people going to watch that much analysis of a single football game? It seemed unfathomable, especially in an era where there was no ESPN and there was no sports television. Just the idea of a live pregame show hadn't really become commonplace until the start of the decade to begin with. And number two, CBS was showing final round coverage of a golf tournament, the Phoenix Open. They'd show actual sports. They'd do a brief pregame show for the Super Bowl, and then they would show the Super Bowl. But a wrench was thrown into that plan when the final round of the Phoenix Open, amazingly enough, got rained out. I can't exactly blame CBS for not having contingency plans for a rainout, seeing as the Phoenix Open was taking place in Arizona in the middle of a desert, where it never rained and where rainouts never happen. It would almost be like blaming the NHL if they had to cancel the Heritage Classic in Edmonton taking place in December because it's too hot to play and it's 85 degrees, so the ice is melted. Like, that is an unforeseeable scenario. So CBS had to pivot, and to fill time, seeing as they couldn't show nothing, and they couldn't show a golf tournament that wasn't happening, they decided to make the pregame show for the Super Bowl super long. Instead of the pregame show being this quick thing like it had been for the previous 11 Super Bowls, this was going to be a multi-hour extravaganza, where they just filled time by talking about the game however they could. On the surface, this seemed like it was going to be a disaster, and seemed like it was a truly last-minute, improvisational thing. because CBS had no real game plan here. Instead, it turned out to be anything but. Because the pregame show for Super Bowl 12 turned out to be a ratings success. Turns out, people don't just love football. They love watching people talk about football, even if nothing is happening. This pregame show happened completely by accident, and now, as a result, every pregame show is a long length, with networks each year constantly testing the boundaries for how long they can make the pregame show while getting ratings and getting advertising dollars. If you want to learn more about that particular situation, I did a really deep dive in a previous video of mine, so you can learn more about this by clicking the card in the upper right corner. The lesson here? Weather necessitates change. CBS wasn't originally planning to do this. The weather in Scottsdale had other ideas. CBS had to call an audible, and in doing so, set the standard for every future iteration of the Super Bowl pregame show. I know this introduction is long, but in these two long examples, I've shown how Mother Nature can force the NFL and can force networks to do things that they otherwise would not do, and otherwise would not even think of. And then, it turns out to be a success where you wonder how it was ever done the old way. It's like when you're playing basketball, and you're at the free throw line, and you don't feel 100% in your back. So you adjust your routine by positioning your back in a different way. And then, you go 10 for 10 at the line, and you're like, wait a second, that actually worked. I never thought about doing it like that before, but now, I've got to do it like that every time. That's what the Bills-Steelers wildcard game was like. That's what the Super Bowl 12 pregame show was like. And that's what the incident in our story today is like. Because you might be asking yourself the obvious question with the divisional round games taking place this weekend if you're watching as of this video getting released. Why are the games played at the time slot that they're at? Why are the Sunday games taking place at 3 o'clock Eastern and 6:40 Eastern? Weren't they always at 1 o'clock and 4:30? And yes, you're right. They used to be at 1 o'clock and 4:30. There used to not be any primetime football for the Sunday slate in the divisional round of the playoffs. The sun would still be up on the West Coast by the time football was over on that divisional round Sunday. And if the divisional round coincided with Martin Luther King weekend, you would have had the opportunity to do whatever you wanted that Sunday night and hit the town without having to worry about football. But that all changed entirely by accident. Weather is the great equalizer. Weather necessitates change. And this is the story behind the 2016 divisional round game between the Pittsburgh Steelers and the Kansas City Chiefs, and how Mother Nature changed NFL history and the way that we watch the playoffs forever. Let's meet the two teams competing in the game we're about to watch unfold. In one corner, you had this team right here, the Pittsburgh Steelers. The Steelers have been a model of consistency as of late, having posted a record of 500 or better every season since 2004. And after making the playoffs in each of the past two seasons with years of double-digit wins, they were picking up right where they left off in 2016. For the second time in the last 3 seasons, the Steelers won the AFC North, and did it with an 11-5 record, with a top 10 offense and a top 10 defense in the league. It wasn't looking good for Pittsburgh for a while. After the first 9 games, they were sitting at 4-5, and were in grave danger of missing the playoffs and having their worst season in quite some time. But entering this game in the divisional round, they were the hottest team in football. Over the last 7 weeks of the regular season, they went 7-0, and then made easy work of the Miami Dolphins in the wildcard round, taking it by a final score of 30-12. Although the Dolphins weren't exactly at full strength in that one, having to resort to Matt Moore at quarterback instead of the injured Ryan Tannehill. Still, the Steelers were a team that you did not want to mess with, seeing as they had not lost in 2 whole calendar months. But as well as the Steelers had played as of late, they were about to face their toughest challenge in quite some time. Look, credit Pittsburgh all you want, but they weren't exactly playing great competition in that stretch of theirs. In their final 7 regular season games, the only team they beat that had a winning record was the New York Giants, and their playoff game was against a completely depleted Miami team. Their opponent, this team right here, the Kansas City Chiefs, that was a completely different beast. This was shaping up to be the best season for the Chiefs in quite some time, as after getting off to a slow start to their season, starting 2-2 after 4 weeks, including a 43-14 drumming at the hands of the Steelers, the Chiefs were one of the hottest teams in football, winning 10 of their final 12 games to win the AFC West for the first time since 2010, and earned a first-round bye for the first time since 2003. Now, they had their best shot in years to advance to the AFC Championship for the first time since 1993 and break a near quarter-century-long drought. But what's crazy about the Chiefs is that they're in this spot in the first place. I know playing the would've, should've, could've game when it comes to hypotheticals might seem ridiculous, because every team can do that. But I feel like it's especially important for our story here, because there's no ifs, ands, or buts about this one. The Chiefs finished the season with a 12-4 record, only winning the AFC West over the 12-4 Oakland Raiders by virtue of the head-to-head tiebreaker, seeing as the Chiefs swept the Raiders. Basically, if the Chiefs were 11-4-1 or 11-5, or had one more blemish on their record, they would not be hosting a playoff game, and the seeding completely changes. And I bring that up because one of the Kansas City wins was this game right here, Sunday, November 27, 2016. It's Sunday Night Football, and we're at Mile High for this AFC West battle between the Kansas City Chiefs and the defending Super Bowl champion Denver Broncos. The game went into overtime, and with the score tied at 27-all and 5 seconds left in the OT period, the Chiefs sent Cairo Santos out to try a 34-yard field goal. Make the kick, and the Chiefs win. Miss the kick, and the game ends in a tie. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. And the kick goes off the post and in. It takes about the most fortuitous bounce imaginable. You don't know which way the ball is going when it goes off the post. The football gods have a funny way of working things out. This one just happened to work in Kansas City's favor and go in. If that kick bounced in quite literally any other direction and did what most balls that bounce off the post do and don't go through, then the game ends in a tie. The Chiefs end the season 11-4-1, and the Chiefs do not win the division or get a first-round bye, meaning that none of the events in our story even occur. The butterfly effect from that kick is insane, as we're going to find out over the next half hour or so. Keep all of that in mind. If that kick bounces off the post and is no good, nothing in our story happens, and NFL history does not change forever as a result. Okay, so we've laid out the stakes for this game, but we have to ask the question of why this game was taking place when it was, which was 1 o'clock Eastern on that Sunday. The Saturday wildcard slate had a game in primetime. The Saturday divisional slate had a game in primetime. Playoff expansion was inevitable, and once that happened, the Sunday wildcard slate would absolutely have a game in primetime. The Conference Championship Sunday had a game in primetime, and obviously, the Super Bowl was in primetime. So why wouldn't the Sunday divisional slate have one as well? Well, the answer to that question was because, in all honesty, it made no sense to have a Sunday night primetime divisional game. Why? What's the point? Why would you do it? There are so many reasons why the NFL was adamantly against putting a Sunday divisional game in prime time, and all these reasons can be summed up by one phrase. There was no need for them to do it. Number one, just from a competitive standpoint, you could make the legitimate argument that having a Sunday night divisional round game puts a team in a significant competitive disadvantage for the conference championship. Think about it. Suppose you have one team hosting a divisional round game on Saturday at 4:30. They win their game. They're already home. They have Saturday night to do whatever they want, rest and recover, and get ready for the conference championship. Now, their opponent plays on Sunday at 8:20 Eastern, and let's say it's the New England Patriots playing on the road against the Los Angeles Chargers. The Pats win their game. It ends at midnight Eastern time. They have to fly across the country, which takes 5 hours and 30 minutes, and they're not even getting back to Boston until around 7:30 in the morning. That's a huge disadvantage compared to their opponent, who had a day and a half more to rest and recuperate. It's kind of unfair. Getting that Sunday night time slot could put you at a significant competitive disadvantage for the next week if you were able to keep your season alive, Plus, what's one of the most common pieces of advice that people like to give? Don't mess with a winning hand. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. If you have a strategy that works for you, then by God, stick to it. If you've got a good golf stroke, don't mess it up. If you've got the best pizza recipe in town, don't mess it up. And if you're already dominating the ratings and getting people to tune in, don't mess it up. The previous year, at 1 o'clock Eastern in the divisional round, the Carolina Panthers played the Seattle Seahawks in this game right here over on Fox. The game turned out to be a fairly competitive and fun battle, as even though the Panthers jumped out to an early 31-0 lead midway through the second quarter, and this game was looking like it was going to be a complete and utter rout, the Seahawks marched back by scoring the final 24 points of the game, and they made things interesting by cutting it to one score with just under 2 minutes left, although the Panthers held on by the skin of their teeth and took it 31-24. The game drew a 21.1 rating, meaning that of all the households in America owning a television set, 21.1% of them were tuned into the game, and the game drew a whopping 36.7 million viewers. A highly impressive number, considering how many people may have turned the game off and done other things when it was 31-0, and the results seemed like it wasn't in any doubt at all. Or, what about the previous year, when two of the most storied and iconic franchises in all of football squared off on Fox on Sunday at 1 o'clock? The Green Bay Packers hosted the Dallas Cowboys in what turned out to be an amazing, albeit highly controversial game, as the Packers defended their home field at Lambeau and won by a final score of 26-21, in the game most infamously remembered today for being the Dez Bryant no-catch game, on a call that is still talked about nearly a decade later. The game, which was close the entire time, with neither team ever leading the contest by more than a possession, drew a 24.9 rating, with a quarter of all television sets in America having that game on, and with over 44.4 million people watching the game on average. The game was a ratings juggernaut at that 1 o'clock time slot. Or, what about the year before that, when the Carolina Panthers hosted the San Francisco 49ers on Fox on Sunday at 1 o'clock? In this battle between two former NFC West rivals, the 49ers went on the road across the country in an unfavorable time slot for them, playing at 10 a.m. local time, and defeated the Panthers, as after Carolina jumped out to a 10-6 lead in the first half, San Francisco answered by scoring the final 17 points of the game, taking it by a final score of 23-10 and holding the hottest team in football, as in a Carolina team that had won 11 of its final 12 games to win the NFC South and get a bye in the first place, completely in check. Even though this game wasn't very good, and featured a team that doesn't exactly have a large national fan base in Carolina, the game still drew great ratings, with the battle between the Panthers and the 49ers drawing a 19.9 rating with an average audience of 33.3 million. Or, as one final example, what about the year before that, when the Atlanta Falcons hosted the Seattle Seahawks on Fox on Sunday at 1 o'clock? In this battle between two teams that had never won the Super Bowl before, the Falcons pulled off a thrilling victory. Atlanta led it 27-7 going into the fourth quarter, with the Seahawks scoring 21 straight points to come all the way back and take a 28-27 lead, before Matt Bryant hit a game-winning field goal for the Falcons with 8 seconds left to give Atlanta a stunning 30-28 win in one of the wildest fourth quarters in NFL playoff history. The game drew great ratings, with a battle between the Falcons and the Seahawks drawing a 19.3 rating with an average national audience of 32.1 million. I could go on, but you get the idea. So you see why the NFL wouldn't necessarily want to mess with this time slot, right? There wasn't any reason to. The 1 o'clock games were doing just fine. Scratch that, they weren't doing just fine. They were doing better than fine. Over the previous 3 years, the 1 o'clock Easter game drew an average TV rating of 21.3, with an average TV audience of 36.6 million viewers, even if that number was inflated a bit by having the Packers and Cowboys play against each other. Because let's be honest, you could play that game on a Tuesday at 3:30 in the morning and it would draw high ratings. Why would you possibly switch it up? You're getting insane ratings as it is, and people are already accustomed to watching football on Sunday at 1 o'clock Eastern, seeing as they were preconditioned to do so for the first 17 weeks of the season plus wildcard weekend. Plus, you had this belief across the league and across the television networks, and understandably so, that a primetime game would be too late. You couldn't start a game late because people would have better things to do if the game was a blowout. Sunk cost fallacy was not a thing for a primetime game like it would be for a 1 o'clock game. Think about it. On the Sunday of divisional round weekend, you've got a game at 1 o'clock Eastern and a game at 4:30. Let's say it's the end of the third quarter in the early game, so the 1 o'clock game, and the game is a blowout. One team is winning by 35 points, the backups are in, and the outcome of the contest is not even in the slightest bit of doubt. Sure, you could flip the game off and do something else, but what are you honestly going to do? Seriously, what are you honestly going to do in that hour in between that game and the other game? It's not enough time to run errands. It's not enough time to leave the house and do something. You're going to see what else is on TV, with your only real option on over-the-air television being the pregame show for the upcoming game taking place at 4:30? No, of course not. You're going to stick with the 1 o'clock game because there's nothing else to do, and there's nothing else to watch. You're going to be right back in that spot in a few minutes anyways watching the next game. So you might as well stick with this game just because. Now, picture the same scenario, but instead of the game taking place at 1 o'clock Eastern, it's taking place at 8:20 Eastern. Now, instead of the game being a 5-possession drubbing by 3:30, it's a 5-possession drubbing by 10:50. What are you going to do? If you're on the West Coast, you might go out and eat dinner. If you're on the East Coast, you might fall asleep and get a good night of rest because you have work the next day, and you have to be up bright and early for your shift. For the Sunday at 1 o'clock option, when weighing the options of whether to watch the fourth quarter of a blowout or do some activity, the scales tip in favor of just watching the end of the game and hoping for the best. There's no real reason not to. But for the Sunday at 8:20 option, when weighing the options of whether to watch the fourth quarter of a blowout or go to bed and get an extra hour or so of sleep, the scale tips in favor of turning the game off. And with all of that in mind, it should make complete sense as to why this game right here, as in the battle between the Pittsburgh Steelers and the Kansas City Chiefs, was going to take place on Sunday, January 15th at 1 o'clock Eastern. The time slot was a ratings winner and had been for quite some time. The time slot was what the NFL was used to and what they had always done. The time slot was easy to remember, seeing as football always took place then. And the time slot was probably the best slot for the NFL from the standpoint of keeping people tuned in for the entire contest. All systems seemed to be a go for Steelers Chiefs on Sunday afternoon at 1 o'clock Eastern. But even the best laid plans of mice and men go awry. Because even though the NFL had one idea, Mother Nature had others. As the game was drawing nearer, as we were approaching the weekend, it was becoming incredibly obvious that this was not going to be any ordinary weekend in Kansas City. Sure, you had the football game making things odd, as this was going to be the first time that the Chiefs were hosting a divisional round game in over a decade. But more importantly, this was going to be an absolutely nasty weekend from a weather perspective, particularly when it came to the ice. Forecasters predicted that this ice storm wouldn't just be any ordinary ice storm, but rather the worst ice storm to hit in 10 years. 2 days before the game, before the worst of the storm was even set to hit, over 4,000 people lost power in Springfield, Missouri, about 2.5 hours south of Kansas City, with 1/10 of an inch of ice being reported on surfaces in the area. And again, this was before the storm was even supposed to hit. This was going to be a bad one, and people were preparing in the anticipation of it being awful. With a projection of 3/4 of an inch of ice in Kansas City hitting over the weekend, with the worst of it coming from Saturday night to Sunday, people were expecting the worst. Power outages were going to be a real possibility. Meteorologists called the storm dangerous and potentially crippling, and the governor activated the National Guard and opened an emergency operations center in preparation. Missouri Department of Transportation crews spent Thursday and Friday doing nothing but treating the roads with salt to try and prevent the effects of the ice storm from being that bad. But the message was clear. If you do not have to be on the roads, Do not go on the roads. Stay home. Becky Almaroff, a state maintenance engineer, said as much, saying, "Ice is the most difficult storm to fight. With large areas of the state expected to get a half-inch or more, it can cause down power lines and potential roadway closures. Motorists should avoid travel this weekend if at all possible. If you're non-essential, please stay home." All across the region, because of the ice storm, things were getting rescheduled, moved around, and canceled. In Wichita, for instance, just 200 miles south of Kansas City, a concert for the Red Hot Chili Peppers got rescheduled from Sunday to Monday. A bridge was closed for the day, Emporia State University postponed a move-in for its students for the spring semester, and all public libraries were closed. Kansas City had its schools send their kids home early on Friday, so no one would be stuck at school on Friday night with the ice storm approaching. It would not be safe for the buses or for parents. But with every single event in the region seemingly being moved or canceled because of the dangerous weather, there was one that was still in place. There was one that was still supposed to be taking place right in the middle of the ice storm. And oddly enough, it was the one that was impacting the most people. That was the Chiefs-Steelers game, still on for Sunday at 1 o'clock Eastern. Obviously, this was a problem. Yes, the NFL had played plenty of playoff games in bad weather before. Playing games in bad weather is a time-honored tradition in the NFL. We saw the Ice Bowl between the Green Bay Packers and the Dallas Cowboys at the 1967 NFL Championship, which was freezing cold. We saw the Freezer Bowl between the San Diego Chargers and the Cincinnati Bengals at the 1981 AFC Championship, which you can learn more about by clicking the card in the upper right corner. As the name implies, that game was freezing cold. We've seen rain games, cold games, and snow games. We've seen it all. But driving in rain and snow is a heck of a lot different than driving in ice, when you truly have no control of your vehicle. If the roads are a mess, it is impossible to do anything on ice. Anyone that's tried driving while it's icy knows the feeling all too well. This wasn't a matter of it being an inconvenience on the players or the fans or anything like that. This was a matter of being able to safely get fans to the game. Think about it. You've got over 75,000 people flocking to Arrowhead Stadium, which is a stadium that is sort of in the middle of nowhere, meaning that you don't have fans taking a subway or a train or public transportation to get there. They're all driving themselves, and they're all arriving the same way by car. You're not walking to the stadium. The game starts at 12 o'clock local time. So when are fans going to start showing up so that they're there on time, they can tailgate and do all the festivities? They're getting there at the crack of dawn, right when the ice storm is still going on. Are these fans essential people? Of course not. Should they be on the roads? Not exactly. But when you've got your first divisional round playoff game at home in over a decade, and you paid upwards of 3 and 4 figures to attend this game, yeah, you're going to be on the roads. And I can't exactly blame the fans for doing that. Nothing's going to stop them from going to this game. And these fans might not exactly be in the best state of mind, seeing as alcohol will be involved. So unfortunately, however hard it is to drive as a sober person on icy roads, amplify that with drunken idiots. Playing the game when the weather was, well, this would be an absolute disaster. However, there is a bright spot to this story. The ice storm was going to be at its worst from Saturday night to Sunday morning. It was going to stink on Saturday and going into Sunday, and no one but essential people should be on the roads during that time frame. But once Sunday morning passed, you could be on the roads with no issue whatsoever. The ice was going to stop accumulating, and everything was going to be significantly safer. In other words, you had an out. It wasn't as though you'd be stuck inside your house all day on the day of the game. The second half of the day was going to be significantly better, significantly easier to drive in, and significantly safer. Which meant that Kansas City and the NFL had two options here. Option 1, leave the game at the same exact time slot that it is at, play it in the middle of an ice storm, satisfy NBC and their prior commitments, satisfy the fans who might have had plans for Sunday night, but marked off Sunday afternoon for the game, and stick with the status quo. Even if fans were going to endanger their lives to get there, even if it went against what the Department of Transportation said in terms of having people stay home, and even if it was unsafe to be on the roads. Or there was option 2. move the game to prime time, and play the game at 8:20 Eastern, or 7:20 in Kansas City. Moving the game to prime time wasn't exactly the most flawless and problem-free solution in the world. There were some drawbacks to it. Obviously, you've got fans who might have made plans for that Sunday night that would be unable to attend the contest now due to the sudden rescheduling of the game. NBC had programming that they were supposed to show that night, and they'd have to move around their entire schedule, while at the same time, try and find something to air during that 3-hour block on Sunday afternoon that they previously did not account for. Plus, there was a real question of what the heck the ratings for a primetime game like this would be for a few reasons. Number one, the very next day was Martin Luther King Day. A lot of people have off that day, and that means that on a Sunday night, instead of people being at their homes, they might be out partying and treating it like a Saturday night, treating it like a 3-day weekend, which is bad for the ratings. It's the same reason why Friday night is not a good night for TV ratings. People elsewhere in the country might have already had plans for that Sunday night because they weren't expecting a football game to be played, so they might not be able to watch the contest. The game being played later in the night means that if the game is bad, people might choose to go to bed and fall asleep to get some rest. They wouldn't do that if the game was bad at the previously scheduled early 1 o'clock window, for the reasons we talked about a few minutes ago. On paper, this was a massive gamble that the league had never done before, but it was the safer option for the fans. If you move the game, you can make sure the roads are safe. You can make sure the parking lots at Arrowhead Stadium aren't just one giant ice rink, and you can significantly reduce the possibility of a fan getting injured and maybe dying on the way to the game. And with those two options in mind, weighing the pros and the cons of everything, the NFL decided to do this and make some history.
Are you ready for some primetime playoff action? The NFL has moved the Chiefs-Steelers game to Sunday Night Football. The impending ice storm triggered the historic move.
The new kickoff is now 7:20 Sunday night right here on your 41 Action News station. We have team coverage on this developing story so you know what to expect this weekend. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I'm Rhiannon Alley.
And I'm Mike Maruzars. It is the first time an NFL postseason game will be played on a Sunday night. The league says it wants fans to be able to get to Arrowhead safely due to that winter weather coming.
That's right. Due to this ice storm right here, the Chiefs-Steelers game was getting moved from 1 o'clock Eastern to 8:20. For the first time in NFL history, a divisional round game was going to be played on a Sunday night in prime time. This was an extenuating circumstance due to ice that hadn't happened at other playoff games, and because of this, the switch was made. As Chiefs President Mark Donovan said on the matter, Commissioner Roger Goodell's first line to me was, how do we make this a safe environment for everyone? And what are the best options? What are the windows? We sort of came to the conclusion together. If you look at the weather, the patterns, and the information we've been provided by the experts, this is the best window to not only play the game, but to commute to and from the game. In a statement put out by the NFL, the league said that the game was moved due to public safety concerns, adding that moving the game from the original 1:05 p.m. Eastern start time will provide local authorities more time to clear roads in the area, as the weather is expected to improve throughout Sunday. It would have been very interesting to see what would have happened if the storm was supposed to last all day on Sunday, and what would have happened then. But based on the fact that the conditions were supposed to improve throughout the day, this seemed like the right call on paper to just push it back a few hours. From a public safety standpoint, simply put, you could not play the game at its original time slot. It would be way too dangerous for everyone involved. But again, prior to this, there had never been a primetime divisional round game on a Sunday. It didn't make a lot of sense to do it, since the ratings in the time slot that the league had been playing in for years on that date were already great. They've been playing on Sunday afternoon for the divisional round for nearly half a century without any issues. You're not messing with a winning formula. Now, because of the necessity and because of Mother Nature, they had to play on a Sunday night. How would this experiment work out? Well, the NFL realized something very quickly, completely by accident. They realized, oh crap, why did we not do this sooner? January 15th, 2017. 7 hours after the game was originally scheduled, we were finally down at Arrowhead Stadium for the divisional round between these two teams right here, the Pittsburgh Steelers and the Kansas City Chiefs. Over 75,000 fans braved the cold weather and the ice from earlier in the day and adjusted any plans that they might have had in order to attend this game and try and cheer on their Chiefs as they look to make it to their first conference championship in nearly a quarter century. The only difference from when they originally bought the ticket is that instead of playing the game in sunlight in much warmer weather, there was significantly more bundling up with the sun down and with the game under the lights. Unfortunately for the Chiefs, as you're able to tell from all these highlights of the contest, the game did not exactly go according to plan. It was yet another disappointing playoff exit for Kansas City, as this was the 9th straight playoff appearance for them that ended short of the conference championship. An impressive feat of playoff utility that seems hard to believe nowadays, knowing how many consecutive seasons they would eventually make the conference championship under Patrick Mahomes just a few years later. But when all was said and done, the Steelers, despite not scoring a single touchdown on the entire day, won the game by a final score of 18-16, with Chris Boswell going 6 for 6 with 4 field goals from 40-plus yards out, and having one of the greatest performances by any kicker in the history of the playoffs. The Steelers seriously won a playoff game where they scored 2 fewer touchdowns than their opponent. Kansas City turned it over twice, not exactly helping their cause by losing the turnover battle there. The Chiefs struggled heavily on third down, going just 2 for 9 on the money down, and a 2-point conversion that would have tied the game with just under 3 minutes left was negated after a holding penalty by the team's former number 1 overall pick at the 2013 NFL Draft, tackle Eric Fisher. For the Chiefs, it was yet another season ending in playoff disappointment, as their quest to make their first Super Bowl in the post-merger era would have to wait another year. While for the Steelers, the Wiz set up a date with the New England Patriots for the AFC Championship a week later and a shot at Super Bowl 51. The game was a close one, though I wouldn't exactly call it a good one. It was the second best game of the playoffs leading up to the Super Bowl completely by default, because the playoffs largely stunk that year, with the only game better in the build-up to the Super Bowl being the game that took place earlier that Sunday between the Dallas Cowboys and the Green Bay Packers, which was a thrilling contest that the Packers won on the last-second field goal thanks to some late-game heroics by future Hall of Fame quarterback Aaron Rodgers. But the million-dollar question for NBC and the NFL still remain. How were the TV ratings? Did people stay up and watch this one? They made the right call from a safety standpoint to move the game, but from a monetary standpoint and a ratings standpoint, which is how the NFL does its business, was it the right move? Weather necessitated change. The NFL had to change, but not all change is good. This one, on the other hand, was. Because to answer the question about whether or not this was the right move, the answer was absolutely, positively, 100% yes. This was a resounding success. When the ratings came in for this game, they revealed a number that was ridiculously shocking to everyone involved. Not only did people watch this game, but they watched it more than they watched it at 1 o'clock Eastern. The previous year, Seahawks-Panthers drew 36.7 million viewers. During the 2013 playoffs, 49ers-Panthers drew about 33 million. During the 2012 playoffs in that window, the Falcons-Seahawks thriller drew 32.1 million. We had a good idea of what games in the 1 o'clock Sunday window usually drew when the Cowboys weren't playing, since the Cowboys skewed everything. And that number was somewhere around 36 million viewers over the past 4 years. The Chiefs-Steelers game in its makeshift primetime slot that was never supposed to happen, you were looking at an average television audience of 37.1 million. It was above the average rating for the Sunday 1 o'clock games, and above every single non-Cowboys 1 o'clock game by a fairly healthy margin. The NFL, completely unintentionally, struck ratings gold. They realized they had something on their hands. Because of weather, they had to move the game to prime time. In the process, found a pot of gold, and found another way to make money. And this number was significantly more impressive when you consider the fact that in 2016, the ratings were down significantly across the board. Ratings usually go down during an election year, and that was especially true in 2016, when you not only had a tumultuous election cycle unlike anything we had seen up until that point, but when you had people boycotting the NFL in protest of San Francisco 49ers quarterback Colin Kaepernick and his kneel-downs during the national anthem. Whether you agree with that or not is your right. I'm not going to make this a political video or statement in any way whatsoever. That's not the point of this. The point is that the NFL definitely felt the impact of people not watching in 2016 due to political reasons. Year to year, the ratings were down 8%, which is a fairly substantial number for any business, especially something like the NFL, which was long regarded as the king of television and a business that was immune to the ratings declines across the board everywhere else. So in that context, for the Chiefs-Steelers game to draw higher ratings than games from previous years? Yeah, that's incredible. That's absolutely incredible. It's as though the NFL was an athlete who set a personal record for fastest time during their worst season ever. And with all of that in mind, the NFL was never going back. By complete accident, the cat had been let out of the bag, and primetime games for the divisional round were here to stay. Because during the 2019 season, due to the success of the Chiefs-Steelers playoff game from a ratings perspective, the NFL made it official. The 1 o'clock 4:30 scheduling for the divisional round, that was gone. Now, games were going to take place at 3 o'clock Eastern and 6:40 Eastern, as in the same time that they took place on the Sunday of Conference Championship weekend. Now, the NFL said that part of the reason for this was to allow for West Coast teams to host in either time slot, seeing as they previously couldn't host the early games, since obviously that'd be taking place at 10 a.m. local time. But this wasn't an issue for 50 years, and no one was complaining for half a century. The reason for this was money. Plain and simple, it was money. Especially after the Jaguars-Steelers divisional round game of the 2017 season, despite being a fun shootout that was extremely close and competitive, drew just 31.4 million viewers, as in 8 million less than the Chiefs-Steelers game, which was a worse game and featured the same exact team playing in it. And after the Patriots-Chargers divisional round game in 2018, which was a 41-28 blowout, in a game that was nowhere near as close as the final score might have otherwise indicated, drew just 29.2 million viewers, making it the lowest rated divisional round game since 2002. At this point, it was clear, based on that sample, Sunday night in prime time was a fine time to play a divisional round game. The ratings proved it. The Chiefs-Steelers game proved it. By complete accident, the NFL figured out the way to increase their ratings. And all it took was a massive ice storm during this game right here to get everything to change. Like I said at the top of this video, weather necessitates change. Mother Nature is the great equalizer. It forces us to do things that we otherwise wouldn't do. And for about half a century, the NFL never put divisional round games on prime time. They just never thought to do it. The ratings were fine as they were, so why potentially mess anything up? Only when they were forced to make the change did they realize that the new way was better than the old way from a business standpoint, and from the standpoint of the average fan. If there was no ice storm, and if the Chiefs were not good enough to host a divisional round game and get a first round bye, simply put, this does not happen. We're still sticking with divisional round Sunday games at 1 o'clock and 4:30, and life is going on as though nothing is any different. I mentioned the Cairo Santos kick in the Chiefs-Broncos game earlier. Again, if that kick by Santos goes off the upright and bounces out and doesn't take the fortuitous bounce that it does, the Chiefs are not hosting a divisional round game, and none of this happens. The butterfly effect from that one kick is nuts, but it's very real. For TV executives, it is extremely real. Because the Chiefs-Steelers game, even though it was a fairly unremarkable game on the field, turned out to be one of the most influential and important games in NFL history. Because the Chiefs-Steelers game brought us the ice storm that changed NFL history forever. Get your official Jaguar Gear 9 merchandise by going to jj9shop.com, and be sure to like and subscribe, as it really helps the channel out a lot. Join me every Wednesday night where we'll play NFL Trivia for cash prizes at 9 p.m. Eastern over on Twitch. To learn more about the history of college football, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 8. To learn more about the history of Major League Baseball, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 7. Also, special thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping out the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. See how you can become a patron and request future video topics in the description below.